4 Eastern, thank you for joining. There's a lot going on. There's at least three pretty big news developments that I want to mention and we can talk about before we get to our two main topics. First, we're going to talk about the focus group that I did earlier in the week. I sent you the full event. Some of you watched it, a lot of you haven't had time. We're going to watch some highlights of that and talk about it. And then we're going to talk about the battleground state polls in the Electoral College. I think there's a way to look at it that's positive for President Biden. There are ways to look at it that are negative. We'll talk through that, take your questions. We have some great folks joining as well that we'll hear from. Three pieces of news. Senator Schumer gave a speech on the floor today about Israel, said a lot of stuff, but he is a very savvy guy and knew full well that what would get the attention, the bulk of the attention that it has, is his calling for a new election in Israel, basically saying to the Israelis, Bibi Netanyahu shouldn't be your prime minister. It's getting a lot of attention, a lot of criticism from Republicans. That's a big deal. Speaker Johnson did an interview with Politico where he basically was more full in saying there's going to be a vote on Ukraine and Israel aid that would be a standalone vote, not a something that would be bundled with some other must-pass bill. The contours of that, how that will exactly go, unclear, but the implication of it is pretty big in that he seems somewhat committed to that vote. And that wasn't as clear 4 hours ago as it is now. We'll see what happens. The biggest news probably in terms of the 2024 race as a linear matter is the prosecutors in the New York criminal trial for Donald Trump have requested a month-long delay to allow the defense to look at some evidence. I have said all along the wheels of justice grind slowly and they grind extra slow if a very rich person at Mar-a-Lago has millions of dollars of legal help to try to make them grind even slower. And I've always said people assume that that case is actually going to happen. There's so many ways it could be derailed, mistrial, et cetera, have been wrong. So we'll see. But that delay is a big deal because now we're talking about no case starting maybe before the late spring, early summer. And again, I think it's going to be a much different beast if someone's trying to make the front runner for the presidency sit in a courtroom. We'll see. We can talk about all that eventually, but I want to get to our two main topics. And the first thing I want to talk about is this focus group. We recruited 8 very staunch Biden voters, people who have no desire whatsoever to see Donald Trump elected, supportive of Joe Biden. And we were interested in taking their temperature now, a little bit after State of the Union, when some of the bedwetting, a lot of the bedwetting had ceased on the question of should and would Joe Biden be the nominee. But as you'll see, this group has a lot of confidence about the president, the vice president, but they're still a little concerned. So let's watch the highlights from the focus group, and then we'll talk about it.
I'm going to talk about President Biden. Raise your hand if you feel better about his chance of winning after the State of the Union. Raise your hand if you feel better about it. All right. What did he do at the State of the Union made you feel more confident about his chances?
He was forceful. He challenged people. He talked to people. He was on topic on everything.
Narrative about Joe Biden going into the State of the Union is that he's decrepit, he is slow, he's feeble. He showed energy, he showed command of subjects, and he showed a little fight and shut down a few people.
I want to go around and ask you to give me 1 or 2 words to describe how you think President Biden did in the State of the Union address.
Good. And also, I know they said that he was political and he needed to be.
Okay, so good and political. Alton?
He did an excellent job. It was forceful and kind of kicked off the 2024 election by that union address.
Forceful. Sandy, 1 or 2 words to describe his performance.
Knowledgeable and in command.
Okay. Randy?
I would go with the forceful and in command.
Okay. Leslie?
Good, but inconclusive.
Okay. Stan?
The bedwetting ceased.
Bedwetting ceased. Deb?
I'd say capable and strong.
Okay. And John?
Outstanding and forceful.
Raise your hand if you're more confident in Vice President Harris's capacity to both help the campaign win and to govern over the last few weeks, say months. Raise your hand if you're more confident in her capacity. All right, so that is hands up. So everybody but Leslie. Tell me what the vice president's done lately, a specific thing or sort of a general practice and pattern that's making you more confident in her capacity to help the ticket and to help govern.
She's out front on issues on the border. She's out front on issues that Joe's assigned her to. She's getting more press coverage too. And she's not bumbled it.
I think her stance on women's rights and abortion, because let's
exactly
face
right.
it, there's a huge women population, and I think we could make the difference.
I think the vice president has really come a long ways. She's shown herself to be strong enough to be president someday.
I just think they improved her portfolio. And at the security conference in Munich, she made some great statements there. And I never had a lack of confidence in her. She was branded as not very effective, and she got stuck with it.
But I do appreciate her stand on reproductive rights. Men shouldn't ever have to be able to speak from a place
Right.
of women's rights to reproductive rights. If we just,
You don't have ovaries, you don't get it. You don't.
that's exactly what I think, Sandra. Thank you.
When you think about the next few months between now and November, President Biden against Donald Trump, do you feel more worried or fired up? Deb, worried or fired up?
I'm worried.
Alton, worried or fired up?
I'm worried.
Okay. Stan?
I'm fired up.
Okay. Leslie?
Worried. I wish I was fired up. Worried.
Okay. Sandra?
Worried.
Okay. John?
Fired up,
Okay.
fired
Randy?
up. Get those battleground
Fired
states.
up.
Okay. And Sandy?
I'm worried.
I want to ask you for a number regarding your confidence that Joe Biden is up to the task of winning this election. Okay. 0 would mean you're certain he's going to lose. 10 would mean you're certain he's going to win. Okay. So where are you? 0 is certain he'll lose. 10 is certain he'll win. Deb?
7.
Alton?
8.
Okay. Stan?
9.
Leslie?
8.5.
Sandra?
7.
Okay. John?
I think he's a 10. I think he's going to win.
Okay. Randy?
8.
And Sandy?
Oh, I'd give him a 9.
So you all seem pretty confident. Were you that confident a month ago, or have you grown more confident?
Grown more confident.
I'm
A
growing
month
more.
ago, I was
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
around a 5 or a 6, but I've grown more confident. After the State of the Union and seeing what he's done. Once they start saying, he did the infrastructure thing, the thing that Trump said he was going to do, but never got around to.
Right.
He had a great bill for the border. He's done so much. He's reduced student loans. I mean, he just got to publicize all the good that he's done for this country. I heard somebody say they voted for Trump because he kept gas prices low. The president has very little to do with
say that
gas
same thing to
prices.
me.
I'm more confident, Mark. What my concern is, I hope his campaign staff get him out there more, because now you have the libertarians running.
Right.
You have no labels ready to put some candidates out. So
Yeah.
these groups may take away some votes from Biden, and Biden's going to have to really come out and do some
I
campaigning,
agree.
talk to young folks, go in the African American
You
community.
got to get him out in front.
Reassure us.
Guess what I'm really disappointed about is that anybody even is questioning that Trump would be a better leader.
Yeah.
Like, regardless, I say this. I did not vote for Joe Biden because I thought he would be a great president. I voted for him because he wasn't Donald Trump. But he has far exceeded my expectations. I think he's done a great job. But when people come back to me and say, well, I just don't know, the economy was better when Trump was, I say he inherited a great economy from Obama.
If you had an opportunity to visit with President Biden and give him one piece of advice about how to win this election, all right, about specifically how to win this election, how to beat Donald Trump, what's the piece of advice you'd like him to hear from you?
And your people out there, your team out there, and fight. This is not going to be an election about policies. It's not going to be about people being reasonable. The Democrats almost always fight with one hand behind their back because they think they're trying to be respectful and empathetic. But that's not the way the Republicans battle.
Remind people every stupid thing that Trump has done in the past and keep it up.
He needs to be out there more in front of people, bragging on his infrastructure bill. Trump had a chance to get the infrastructure bill done. He never did it. Joe got it done. And that's a big part of what the country needs.
He needs to tout his successes out there. People just don't know. I tell people all the time, go look up, go do a Google search on what Joe Biden has accomplished in the last 3 years, and you will be amazed at what he's accomplished. And they're just not saying it loudly and out front, and that's what they need to do.
I would tell them, just remind us all that what you've done over the last 4 years, and remind us of where we came from before you were elected. All the craziness, the investigations.
Yeah.
At the end of Trump's term was just absolutely chaos. Let us know what you're going to do in the future for all Americans. And
Embrace your age, embrace the good things about your age and your experience, and that it's not 91 counts. Be Scranton Joe.
I think Jill Biden should get out there more.
I like that slogan about I get things done. I'm 79 and I can understand feeling a little slow, walking a little slower, and everything else. He has gotten things done. And then in comparison, show all the things that Trump didn't get done, or all the things that he screwed up.
If I could sit down with Joe, I would say, Joe, just be Joe and talk to the blue collar folks. And don't be afraid to talk to some of the people maybe who follow Trump. Maybe we can, maybe he can sway some of those voters if he got in with the blue collar folks and let him be who he is. Doesn't matter if he stutters, doesn't matter how old he is. Let Joe be Joe. If I could sit down with him and have a heart to heart, I think he would be funnier than hell. Oh, excuse me, heck. I think he would be a real hoot. I think he'd be a real
Probably say hell.
First, I want to bring in Tim Hogan, who's a Democratic strategist, Noah Rothman, my colleague here at Two-Way, and Seltzer, and Vin Weber. So if those four folks could unmute and join here. I was struck by three things primarily. One is their confidence. They say newly found confidence that President Biden can win. Two, their support for Vice President Harris, and very aware of her recent activities. And then lastly, at the end, I didn't show it there, but at the end they said to me, Mark, when you ask Republicans if they're more worried or fired up, what do they say? And the fact is, Republicans still say fired up. Most Republicans I talk to, whether they're pros or non-pros, think Trump's going to win, and they seem pretty confident about it. This group was split on that question of fired up or worried, but that's a balance, right? Because you want to not be complacent, but you want to not feel like the party is in a hopeless position. So let me start with Tim Hogan. And Tim, what are your main impressions from watching that about where the base stands in terms of confidence and concern?
Well, it's good to see. I mean, if we could replicate Stan and just have him be the personality of every Democratic, that would be great. I think what a lot of the Democratic base tuned into the State of the Union to see is to check on the president and get a gauge on his age and whether or not he's able to perform. And I do think it is a detriment to Republicans. And I understand why they want to do this. I understand why they're hammering the age narrative. It is useful for them, but they continue to set the bar so low. And they did this in 2022, but they're doing it more now. They continue to set the bar so low for the president that if he comes out and completes a full sentence and has some energy in his speech and throws some punches, and I think they're leaning into contrast more, he looks highly competent. And, I get why they do it, but I think it's something that the Biden campaign and team knows how to take advantage of.
Yep. If you're going to want to participate, and I didn't name you earlier, please raise your electronic hand and we'll call on you. Again, I want to sort of cycle through some of the folks here, but please raise your hand if you want to make a comment or ask a question. Vin Weber, who can't stay with us too long, so I want to go to next. Vin, if I'm right, and I'm pretty sure you've had the same experience, Republicans still more confident even after State of the Union on balance than Democrats. Is that a party cultural thing? Is it a Trump thing? Is it a Biden thing? What accounts for Democrats being less confident, besides obviously being behind in the polls, not a small factor?
Well, it's a good question. I think Republicans are more confident. I think I watched Biden's speech. I'm not surprised at the reaction we got from the Democrats on the focus group. He was aiming his message directly at them, and most of it was just to vilify Republicans. So I heard the opposite of that from all my Republican friends. They've never been so pissed off at him. They've never thought he was so bad. They've never heard a worse speech. I had people calling me up saying I couldn't watch the whole damn thing. Now, I watched it. I think he did what he had to do. He polarized his base in his favor. He eliminated the talk about dumping him from the ticket, and that's a huge accomplishment. I don't think that he helped himself in terms of the general election. He still might. I do not express the great confidence of a lot of the Trump supporters that he's sure to win this. I think it's a very close call myself, and depends a lot on externalities between now and the election.
Okay, Ben, thank you. Ann Seltzer, who has sat through and conducted one or two focus groups herself. I'm always a little embarrassed for Ann to see my work because she's great. And what was your view of that group, and if you learned anything, what was it?
Well, this was by far the most enthusiastic group of Democrats that I've heard in a while.
Yeah.
And yet there was still that sense of being worried about it. It's hard for them to let go of their worry blanket. It's just something that they just worry all the time. I think with the Trump voters, certainly the ones that I chat with in everyday life, the polling word we use is enthusiasm. And we saw it in spades in the run up to the caucuses. And I'll just mention the three numbers I thought were really important to understand Donald Trump. When we offered his supporters to say whether they were extremely enthusiastic, very enthusiastic, just somewhat, or not that enthusiastic, 49%, nearly half, said extremely enthusiastic. And for Ron DeSantis, it was 23. He didn't get even half as many. And these are people who chose him as their first choice. Right. And for Nikki Haley, it was 9. She didn't get even half as many. And it says more, I think, about the culture of Trump and the way that they have learned and been reinforced for expressing it. And now that carries on. DeSantis is gone and Nikki Haley is gone. And what lives on is this culture of enthusiasm isn't the right word. I'm still searching for the right word.
Noah Rothman, I think, and again, this is phrasing a slightly different thing that I and others have said since the State of the Union. He didn't just, as Vin said, excite the base. He didn't just put to rest questions about whether he was going to be on the ticket or not. It seems to me that what that group gives voice to is this notion that they're now recognizing, as the Biden campaign has said for a long time would happen, this is it. No more pining for another candidate, no more not mustering enthusiasm for Joe Biden. They weren't just, Joe Biden's what we got, so we need to run. They were talking about his accomplishments. They were talking about what he needed to do to win. It seemed to me the kind of overhang, not gone completely because they're still fearful, but the overhang of who's our general going to be and are we happy with him, for that group at least, seems largely gone.
Well, that's what this speech was designed to do. It sacrificed an opportunity to reach out perhaps across the aisle or to voters who are persuadable to excite the base. And it achieved what it was supposed to achieve. What I didn't hear in that focus group, which I thought was interesting and illustrative, is any consternation over Joe Biden's use of the word illegal, which was probably his most exciting moment of that speech for persuadable voters, for people who aren't in the Democratic base. But what did Joe Biden and the White House focus on in the immediate aftermath of that speech, up to and including sitting down with Jonathan Capehart and virtually apologizing for using that language? The illegals remark. That's what dominated the space. The White House is so sensitive to media criticism, to the most minute discomfort among the progressive base, that they won't give him any opportunity to move on beyond them and appeal to more voters outside their coalition. That's his job now. We're in general election mode, and the progressives have to allow Joe Biden the slack to appeal to voters who aren't them, and they just won't let him do it, and the White House won't let him move on from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think he did talk about some things that weren't just base issues that do have broader appeal, but there's no doubt that if he loses this election, moments like that, where if he stumbles into a sister soldier moment, he takes it back as soon as he can, I think will be near the top of the list of why he didn't win. Roger.
And Mark,
go ahead,
if I could,
go, of course.
if I could just chime in there, I'm reminded again and again ever of the New Hampshire focus group ahead of 2016, where the people said, "Why do you like Trump so much?" Well, he's one of us.
Yeah.
And okay, well, he flies on a private plane, but they said, no, he talks like we talk. And the Joe Biden that is apologizing is not the one who's talking like we talk.
Yep.
And I think that reminds people again and again when they say he's one of us, Scranton Joe, but there's that other side of it where the hypercorrection doesn't sound like ordinary people.
Yes, I mean, and he has been fortunate to run in 2016 against Secretary Clinton and against Joe Biden, both of whom are appalled at Donald Trump's, in their view, the populist billionaire. But there are developments that reinforce his advantage there. Roger Baskin, question or comment, please. And others, if you'd like to get in, please raise your hand. Go ahead, Roger.
Can somebody please help me understand why Trump is getting 20% of the black vote and 45% of the Hispanic vote in the polls?
Yes. Great question. Now, look, those numbers, you can find polls that have those numbers. I don't think he'll end up with those numbers. But Donald Trump has always believed that he could appeal, particularly to male Hispanics, young male black voters. Arnold Schwarzenegger, same way. There's a relationship they have that's cultural. I think I'll say something that won't be popular with everybody, but the Democrats called Donald Trump a racist for saying that a lot of people in the black community identify with him being, in his view, persecuted by law enforcement, by being indicted. I think that it may be right, it may be wrong. It's not racist, and there's some evidence that it's correct. And he has done things like criminal justice reform that have given him cultural and issue ties to members of the African American community, and again, I'm simplifying it, but the Hispanic voters as well. They care about the border, they care about inflation, and he is got cultural appeal.
I'll posit a theory that Ann would probably know better than I would, but it seems to me that the appeal of Donald Trump among minorities, and you have to break out Hispanics and African Americans, they're not the same and have very distinct views, but it correlates pretty strongly with degree holding.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party has become very top heavy with degree holders, appeals to people who have advanced degrees, college degrees, graduate degrees. And to the extent that Donald Trump's coalition includes non-white voters, it is made up increasingly of people who don't have those degrees.
Yeah. Tim Hogan, is the Democratic Party privately freaking out over these numbers? Again, maybe those percentages aren't exactly correct, but it's a factual matter that you won't have Biden spokespeople admit that they've got a problem in these states with some members of communities they need to win a higher percentage of than they're currently getting.
Yeah, I mean, we don't even do our freaking out privately, so it's public. But I mean, I think your theory is on in the sense that we can't look at and flatten minority groups and say that our appeal to black voters is couched entirely in civil rights language. Yeah. We can't flatten Latino voters and say it is all immigration. And, I think in the past, going back to 2012, 2008, Democrats have frequently viewed, particularly with Latino voters, immigration sort of as a gateway issue, that if you're really bad on it, that it will prevent communication that's effective on other issues that every other voter cares about, whether it's education, the economy, healthcare, things of that nature. But I think there's a little bit of nostalgia, and I think it again is like a false walk down memory lane for the Donald Trump presidency, but he does it fairly effectively, and it's a challenge for the Biden folks to push back and fight on it. Is voters have almost like erased from their memory what that fourth and final year from Donald Trump looked like, and they are holding on to the good feelings of the third year economy. And I think that is some of the fight that Joe Biden has to bring. And one thing that he honed in on, and it tests so positively, and looking at some dials from Navigator polling that they were doing during the speech, on the economic agenda, he honed in very well on Donald Trump's economic plan is more tax cuts for the wealthy and well-connected and the rich, and finding that economic populist message for Joe Biden, because you're not going to convince people who have a feeling about the economy right now that it's bad, that it's actually good, but that if you have their interests at heart, moving ahead, that's a big rock for them to be able to move.
Jordan, I'd ask you to unmute and ask your question. And Robert, if you could turn your camera on, you'll be next. Jordan.
Yeah, just more of an anecdotal story here. I work right across from the Roosevelt Hotel here in Midtown Manhattan. I live in Midtown Manhattan. My boyfriend works right across the street at JP Morgan on the other side of the Roosevelt Hotel. We are flabbergasted by what we have seen with the migrant crisis. Every single Uber driver I talk with, every single cab driver I talk with have all said they voted for Joe Biden in 2020. They're either not voting in 2024 or they're voting for Trump. People here in the building, other tenants, are voting red this time. I will say that illegal immigration and the migrant crisis generally, I think is on people's minds, and I think explains a lot of the polling with regard to more minority support for Trump.
Jordan, next time one of your Uber drivers says that, try out the Biden line and say, what about the fact that the Republicans blocked the bill 3.5 years into the presidency? See if that works. Jordan, did you vote for Joe Biden last time?
I did not, no.
You did not, okay. Jordan, thank you. Anybody want to respond to Jordan? Okay. Robert, if you can turn your camera on, great. If for some reason you can't, just unmute and ask your question, make your comment. Robert Trotner. All right, Robert, no. So let's go to Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, if you could unmute.
Yes, I thought the most remarkable thing about the speech, which hasn't really been talked about, is he put 3 priorities that he's going to lead his campaign on, and number 1 was Ukraine. I mean, everybody knows what they think about January 6th by now and abortion, but I think this is, this is the kind of issue that'll still be, people will be talking about 30, 40, 50 years from now. And I was reminded, I saw a radio talk by FDR where they published a map a few days before, and he asked everybody listening to have this map in front of them. They need to put a map up. Nobody knows where Ukraine is and Poland is and all of these NATO countries. He needs to put a map up and explain the peril of walking away from Ukraine. And I actually think that Vice President Harris, whenever she's speaking for Biden on these international issues, especially at forums across the seas, she's much more forceful and effective. I've never been a big fan, but when she speaks for the president on foreign policy things, she really seems to come into her own. So I think they really need to bear down on what Biden clearly thinks is the number 1 issue.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Anybody will comment on that? I've got something I want to say, but.
Sure. First of all, I think it'd be really great to have Kamala Harris or Joe Biden leading like a Richard Nixon style, explaining the missile gap at the wall with the map. I think that would be enjoyable. Republicans have a social desirability bias problem when it comes to Ukraine. I think in their DNA, fighting Russians, pushing back Russian territorial aggression and expansionism is something to which Republicans are inclined. But Donald Trump, who has control over the Republican Party's evolution, has been ambiguous about what he wants to see out of the Republican Party vis-a-vis support for Ukraine. A lot of people are filling in the blanks there. Some are bolder than others, but most of them are just intimidated and don't want to get out in front of what Donald Trump says. But in their heart of hearts, I think they would support Ukraine. So it would be a little bit of emotional blackmail for Joe Biden to put that to them in such stark terms, but he absolutely should, because that does have the capacity to shake some Republicans out of what is a partisan inclination to stand by Donald Trump, and at least have a dark night of the soul about what not supporting Ukraine would mean.
Right. I'm curious to
see. I do want to say,
ahead,
I think voters rightfully fill in those blanks because of the posture Donald Trump has publicly has, which is to say, if you don't pay your NATO fees, I know Ukraine is not in NATO, but if you don't pay your NATO fees, Russia can do whatever the hell they want to you. That's a very real and stark threat. And I think that's sort of like dismissive behavior. And you see candidates up and down the ballot like Mike Rogers in Michigan trying to say, oh, he's just being funny. I agree they don't want to get in front of him, but there's no policy there. And I think it doesn't require a lot of imagination to see how that's a big threat for voters. And I think there's a reason, Biden led with NATO in the State of the Union.
Yep. Glenn, go ahead.
I was actually just raising my thumb in agreement, but as someone who has lived in Eastern Europe extensively, including Russia, Georgia, worked in Ukraine, I can't imagine. I mean, I obviously know where it is, but the Russian menace is impossible to escape, and you have Orban come to the States and say that Trump is not going to give Ukraine a penny, will pull out of NATO. What's going to be? I think it's going to change the world order, and I don't understand how Republicans don't see that.
Well, some Republicans obviously do, just not one wing of the party. But you look at Senator McConnell; he's been, pushing very hard. Some would argue being more forceful than even the president has been. Although I think the president's been quite forceful, and no doubt that when we think about the impact on the election, facts on the ground in Ukraine are going to matter a ton. And I do believe if Speaker Johnson follows through here, if there is an overwhelming vote in this House in support of military aid for Ukraine, I think that's going to be a big deal. It's going to be a big deal for the facts on the ground and for standing up to Russia, but it's also, I think, going to be a big deal for the president. I want to talk about the Electoral College and the polls. And I sent you all the link to the full focus group. I'll send it around again when I send around the link to this session. But I recommend it to you. I learned a ton. Focus groups, to me, they're not quantitative, they're qualitative data research, but I learned a ton from those folks. And again, their confidence, their renewed, it's a confidence in the president and the vice president, but also, again, some of the concerns they had. So I did a little work on thinking about the president's position now, behind in the battleground state polls. Not a great place to be, but not behind very far. And given how bad his numbers on job approval, concerns about his age, compared to Trump on things like who will help your family more, who's better on immigration, he could be down 10. If you took the names off it and just went to a political science class and said, here's the incumbent standing versus the challenger, what do you think the horse race is? I don't think people would say the horse race is as close as it is. So that's, I think, good news for him. I looked at an article from Politico from December of 2011. So that's a few months earlier in the cycle. But they looked at a Gallup USA Today poll that had a survey of the voters in battleground states. It was a bigger list of battleground states. This was in the olden days when Colorado and Iowa and New Mexico were part of and Ohio were part of and Virginia were part of a battleground list. So it's a much bigger and different list of states. But back then, not only was Barack Obama trailing Mitt Romney in the battleground states by 5 points, he was trailing Newt Gingrich by 3 points, okay? Now, that's, I think, good news for the president and for Democrats. It suggests that you can be an incumbent and behind, several months out and still win. However, couple of things that I'd say would be worrying. I sent you all in the email recently the list of the recent battleground state results. I look at the lead, at the margin, and Trump has been ahead in almost every battleground state poll of late in the big 7 states. But I look at where President Biden is. Now, some polls are likely voters, some are registered, different sample sizes, maybe different methodology. So you got to always not look at an individual poll, but at the trend. But the trend is, if you look at the numbers I sent you, President Biden is generally 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. He's rarely above that. And in a normal race, an incumbent who's below 45 is not going to win because voters have made up their mind. Probably they're not going to vote for the incumbent. The challenger gets the bulk of the undecided. Now, this is not a normal race because the challenger is a quasi-incumbent and very well known. And he's potentially facing some criminal trials before the election. But nonetheless, I do believe that one of the things Republicans, or Democrats rather, really have hung their hat on for a long time is this notion that Trump has a ceiling, and that if it's effectively a 2-person race, if the Democrats can make sure that there's no other candidate or candidates on the ballot in the battleground states getting a decent share of the vote, the Trump ceiling of 45, 46, 47 means he can't win. And that still may be true. There may be a Trump ceiling there that would keep him from winning. But I think what we're seeing currently, not as a prediction about the future, because again, Barack Obama showed that can change, is Biden seems to have a ceiling right now too. And Biden's ceiling is lower than Trump's ceiling. I don't know that it's true anymore, based on where we are at this moment. It's a snapshot of where we are, that Trump can't win an what is effectively a two-person race. Now, if there are other candidates in the race, the Green Party candidate clearly hurts Joe Biden more. If the Green Party candidate gets a decent share of vote, don't know that Bobby Kennedy will be on the ballot, so I don't spend much time analyzing that. But when I do, it's difficult to say, to my mind, where he would draw from. But there's still no doubt that Joe Biden is in a position now where he is behind. And as I said, encouraging, I think, for him that he's only a little behind. However, go back to what happened in the 2012 cycle. December, President Obama was behind in some of the battleground states. When we got to the spring, he moved ahead. And with the exception of a couple of days when he had a bad debate performance in the first debate, where his numbers took a hit, he never lost his lead. And when I would talk to the Obama people in 2012, and I would say to them, you know, you're only winning by 3, you're only winning by 2, you're only winning by 4, does that mean, as the incumbent, that Governor Romney could surge and do better? They would say, the data does not move. It just does not move. And every time they with the exception of right after that first debate, they had what they called a small but durable lead in the battleground states. And it was almost laughable how little it moved. Now, I don't think that's going to happen this year to the same degree, because there's there's no volatility about people's view of the two candidates currently, but Trump legal, Israel, Ukraine, unexpected developments that we all are expecting. I think there probably will be some facts on the ground volatility, but it's also possible that people's views are baked in. And what we're seeing now, 48-43, 47-42, even 46-44, that those numbers are the numbers, and they reflect the Trump ceiling and the Biden ceiling. It still could be very close, but not necessarily a situation where Biden can go ahead. Now, that having been said, Biden could go ahead in 3 weeks. You know, that could happen. It doesn't appear, based on the battleground state and the national polls we've gotten since State of the Union, that State of the Union was going to be some sort of transformative event. I want to do one more thing and then open it up to everybody. I see some hands raised, and I want to get my colleagues back in. But put up the Electoral College map, and I just want to talk a little bit about it. I think I did this right. I toggled every state and the electoral votes in Maine and Nebraska. I toggled them where I think they're probably headed. And I just want to point out a few things. The states in gray are the 7 battlegrounds that will decide this. And one thing is, Democrats are playing zero offense, which is also the case in the Senate map, and that's related, and potentially they can impact each other. But if you think about, besides the states in blue and the states in gray, what are states that could be in play? Again, in recent times, you could say, well, maybe Ohio's in play or Iowa. They're not in play. You'd say maybe Florida's in play or Texas is in play. Those are probably the 4 that Clinton and Biden, Clinton 16, Biden 20, would have been the next bundle up. No, they're not in play. Now, something could change and they could come in play, but they're not in play now. And I'd be surprised if the Democrats put any real money in those places, although you do see candidate travel. What are the states where Republicans could be on offense? New Hampshire would be the first one. And then after New Hampshire, there's a big drop-off. After New Hampshire, then you go to Minnesota, maybe, New Mexico, maybe. Big drop-off, though. And that's why this is, we've had, over time, since '92, the battlefield of battleground states has grown smaller and smaller. And it is this cycle, the smallest it will be if things stay the way they are, the smallest it's ever been, in part because New Hampshire is probably not in play, could be, but Florida, Ohio, Iowa, states where Hillary Clinton and to some extent Joe Biden put in some effort or a lot of effort, those are just not in play. Now, the problem for Joe Biden is in the 7 battlegrounds, and you can see the way the states are allocated, Democrats actually are a little bit ahead now, right? A little bit ahead if you push everything but the 7 battlegrounds. But the problem is there are Democrats who are very worried about pretty much every one of these states. You could talk to local Democrats, local officials, state officials in all 7, and privately, and hear a great deal of worry. Now, as I said the other day in a different forum, if Trump wins 4 of the 7, he'll win. He could win with a combination of 3 of them, but he'll probably need 4 of the 7. And right now, again, he's ahead in all public and private polling I've seen. He's ahead in every one of them, not by a lot, but he doesn't need to win them by a lot. Of course, he just needs to win them by 1 vote. So that's my view of where things stand. I think Joe Biden could win, for sure, but he's going to have to go ahead in some of these states, both as a matter of psychology to keep Democrats from losing their faith. You can take the map down. But also eventually, in order to win the electoral votes, I'm no math genius, as I like to say, but he's going to have to do that. Marina Archer, let's have you come in, unmute, please, ask a question or comment, and then let's get my colleagues in as well. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I want to say a few things. I'm a social psychologist who grew up in Europe, 2 miles from a NATO base, and I had the B-52s flying over my head once a day for years. I see you're talking about so many things, numbers in a granular way, but I want to talk about something else because you're talking about fish in the water, but I want to talk about the water and context that nobody's focusing on. This is not a normal campaign, and this is not a normal election year. And there are 3 main factors that I want to talk about that are not talked about. Why do so many people feel this way about Biden or about Trump? Ms. Seltzer before said she couldn't find the exact word. The exact word is cultic. Cultic. Mr. Trump built a cult. How do you build a cult? It takes a village. What is the village? The entire MSM enterprise, mainstream media, and legacy press, whose headlines have become almost impossible to read. They are aberrant. So why do so many people believe these things about Biden? Because of the mischaracterization and misrepresentation in the press, and because of the normalization of the most grotesque and pathological things that Mr. Trump and his accomplices have been doing. Number 1. Number 2.
Let me ask you a question about number 1, just so I understand. Maybe others did.
Yes.
Do you think that my sense is, just to confirm, you think the press doesn't cover Trump tough enough because he does things that should be getting even tougher coverage? Is that?
No, I'm saying that the press has normalized something that is pathological behavior and that has misrepresented Biden's record for years, basically.
Okay, so in other words, you think the press, in effect, on balance, favors Trump? The net result of the coverage, you think, benefits Trump? Is that what
Absolutely.
you think?
Well, how do you think Trump was able to get to this point with his felonies and all he's done without accountability and building a cult? You cannot build a cult without all these enablers.
I'm not sure I agree with you, but go to your second point, please.
Okay. Second point, institutions have failed us. We voted, so many of us in 2020, because we wanted justice and accountability. And what happened? Insurrectionists are still in Congress. Trump is out there free with his accomplices. Brazil got this done within a year. Brazil, not the greatest country in the world. They got Bolsonaro out of the way, and they investigated and got his accomplices out of the way. It's been 1 year, a little over 1 year. Number 3, this is not a normal election. If you think that in November things are going to be normal, they're not going to be, because there are many signs out there that are very clear for people that are watching, just like there were so many signs before January 6th, that something else is going on.
What's an example of something that's not going to be normal?
For example, we're going to have intimidation at the polls. We could have a complete, for example, taking down of the internet. Remember a few days ago when everything went down? And that could cause chaos.
Yes.
Eric Prince said recently that if you have chaos and you have all this stuff happening, then the result is not clear. Therefore, things go to the House.
Yeah.
Because, Trump and his people know that they don't have even all the Republican base. Look at Nikki Haley's result. So they're not planning to win in a conventional way. They're planning something totally different.
Thank you for all that. I want to ask you one question, and then I want to thank you. I loved what you said. Really interesting. Who do you think is going to win?
It's interesting that you keep focusing on the race. I think that we are in unprecedented times, and anything can
I
happen.
understand, but I'm not minimizing all the things you said. I thought they were really interesting. I'm just curious, if you put everything you said into the blender, are you worried Trump's going to win, or are you confident Biden's going to win?
I think if we get really, really lucky, we could squeeze by like in 2020.
Yeah.
But I think we may not be so lucky because of all the factors and all the things that I explained to you.
Okay, thank you for that. Here's one thing I want to say. Every election since 1992, in my view, the winning candidate has been favored by the media. That might be a coincidence. It might be absolutely correlated. There might be cause and effect that's in both directions, but the 3 times Republicans have won since 92, I believe the press, on balance, favored them. And I believe in this race, right now, the press is favoring Biden. I don't know that that will sustain, but I think it's a huge advantage for him. I understand the passion you feel, and of course, tens of millions of Americans feel that the media also normalizes Trump and doesn't cover him tough enough in a lot of ways. I think that's true also. But that doesn't mean that on balance, the press is not only rooting for Biden, but daily emphasizing the issues that they think will hurt Trump. I have said many times, some people agree with me, some don't, that I think some of those issues, the way they covered actually on balance, helped Trump inadvertently and ironically, including coverage of a lot of legal stuff. Loved the passion you have, and I loved all the points you made. And I don't only want us to talk about the horse race here in the polls, absolutely, but it's inescapable that all the things you're talking about go to that question of what's going to happen, which is of great interest to people here, and why. So thank you. Other people have questions, please raise your hands. Other people have questions, raise your hands. While we wait, I'll go back to Tim, and Tim, ask you, in thinking about the battleground states and the president's travel now, right? He's gone to, by next week he'll have gone to, I think, every one of the 7. I may be forgetting one. I think he's going to all 7. He's going to all 7 and 8 New Hampshire in the sort of the extended post-State of the Union tour. How do Democratic political professionals, including the ones working for the campaign, how do they track the success or failure of those visits? Do they email around PDFs of newspaper front pages and local news clips, but how do they know whether those trips worked or not? What are the metrics?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a big part of it, is whether or not you're breaking into local media markets. And I think the easiest path for them, and you see Vice President Harris in Minnesota today, you saw Biden in Milwaukee yesterday. It's through the blue wall plus Nevada or plus Georgia, and it's maintaining those states. But the question also is, are there moments from those events that can break through just a local media bubble and set some sort of national narrative? Like I am looking to see if there's any big moment that breaks through from Vice President Harris's visit today, because I think she delivered an extremely effective message talking about Minnesota and what governance looks like there under Democratic control versus a lot of Midwest Republicans who are banning abortion, and it's an issue that we know we need to mobilize people on, and is a key part for our base. So yes, those front pages locally, extremely important, but it's also important to see how that carries a story through the day. And I haven't seen a lot of that from rallies in these swing states.
Can you think of an example from this whole cycle that you would cite to say that worked, whether it was accidental and fortuitous or something they planned? Don't mention anything with ice cream.
Yeah, right. Anything with ice cream, put an ice cream cone in his hand and ask about a humanitarian crisis. I think it is, something like the Valley Forge speech, right? Where there was a big framing and a lead up and softening of the ground for the media to preview that speech. And it happens to be in a battleground state. I think there is, message planning questions that go into making something like that effective.
Yep. Marty, unmute, or you're unmuted. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to respond to not just what Marina said, but some of your responses.
Yes, sir.
My sense is that January 6th of 2021 was basically a rehearsal. And they really learned what their mistakes were. And they're not going to make the same mistakes again. And I'm just wondering, and I'm very worried that it's not going to matter who really wins the majority of the electoral vote this year. What is President Biden doing to prepare for what they may be planning? Is it possible to do that?
Yeah. It's a great question.
Really is not an ordinary election.
Yeah, part of the challenge, of course, is that our elections are run state and local, not by the federal government, right? So the federal government has to work with state and local to, from cyber to physical security. I understand, again, the point you're making, and I totally appreciate the passion you have about it. I'm a little bit more confident in the systems. I shouldn't say I'm more confident. I have confidence that the systems will hold. And of course, the fact that it's not the incumbent who you're worried about, but a challenger, he'd have a harder time doing what he tried to do last time and what people did try to do on his behalf. I'll also say, however, I am worried, and increasingly so, about cyber problems and the greatest ease our enemies have ever had to disrupt the election, which is a goal of theirs. So I think you're right to be concerned, and I'm just hoping my optimism about the institutions holds. Let's try to get some more questions in, because we've just got 10 minutes left. Mayhill Fowler, I'm unmuting you. I'd love for you to come on camera if you can, but you're unmuted. Go ahead. Nope, try again. One more time. There you go.
Could someone out there speak to whether or not they think there are going to be debates? Because it seems to me that is one thing that the American public at large will pay attention to. Are there going to be debates? Whereas the gentleman who just spoke, Biden going to various venues in various states, I think the time has passed when people pay attention to that, not to mention the fact that so many places no longer have local newspapers.
Yeah. I think there'll be one debate, and I might be being optimistic. Noah, what do you think?
I go back and forth. I don't think the president's campaign wants to have debates. I think that eventually, if fears are not allayed about Joe Biden's mental acuity and his vigor, he may be compelled to do so. And he will probably perform at par, given his performance at the State of the Union. But I think the president wants to avoid that at all costs, and they might get away with it.
Yeah. Ann or Tim, what's your view?
I think there's incentives for both sides to hold at least one debate. I think what Noah is saying, I think, is sort of the bar setting for Republicans, that it's going to be a struggle for Biden to keep it together. And so, a performance that looks like something like the State of the Union is going to be good for him. And I don't think Trump would be able to resist being on a debate stage. So I think there's incentives for both sides to do it.
Tim, besides me, who would your first choice as moderator be?
Putting me on the spot.
All right, think about it. And do you want to weigh in on debates?
I hardly ever make a prediction, but I'm going to just take the opposite. That I'm more leaning to think they'll come up with reasons to not
have any.
But whether it be unable to agree on a moderator or a sponsor, I don't see it happening.
I think the Biden people want one, just so they can say they did one, and they'll do. It's so easy to drag out the debate about the debates. I think that's what Ann is getting at. They'll say, the table needs to be round, the table needs to be square. We don't like this moderator, we don't like that moderator, we don't like this venue, and make Trump just agree to everything. But even if Trump says, I don't care, it can be, we'll debate in Madison, Wisconsin on campus with Rachel Maddow as the moderator. Trump will say, I'll be there. Even then, the Biden people can say, well, we think it should start at 8 o'clock, not 9 o'clock. So I think that'll lead to either Ann being right 0 or maybe 1. All right, got some hands up again. Just 7 minutes to go. We always end on time. Bob, ask you to unmute, comment or question. You're still muted, Bob. I'm going to ask you to unmute one more time, see if we can get you to do it. There you go.
I'm unmuted.
You are,
Are we
Bob.
good?
Go ahead. All good. Go ahead.
2 questions. Last week, Mark, you were good enough to respond to a letter I sent. I live in deep red Cherokee County, Georgia. And a bunch of my Republican friends, which we have a little cocktail hour every week, have come around and said they are unequivocally not voting for Trump. Now, they're not voting for Biden either, is what they're saying at the moment, but they're not voting for Trump. So I take that to be a good sign. Question 1 I have is, when they do all these pollings, the demographics of the pollings, is it broken down by age group in a lot of these pollings that they're seeing? Male, female, over 65, under 35, blah, blah, blah. I don't see those tabs myself. And secondly, Mark, a question to you directly would be, when we had the state maps up, and you're saying, okay, this one's out of control, can't do this one, can't do this one. Kansas was a 6. What happened in Kansas in 22 when the women came out to vote in favor of Roe v. Wade? It was tremendous numbers, wasn't it?
Yes.
Why do you think that would not happen again? I think once the women become involved, and God forbid Taylor Swift, or maybe I'm hoping Taylor Swift puts her weight behind this, that young women and women under 50 are just going to come out in droves that I don't think the polls are picking up any of.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me say so.
Two great questions, both of which I'm hoping Ann will answer because she'll be better on both those.
Yeah, well, I can tell you the polling operations have access to all of the crosstabs. I poll for Grinnell College just up the road here. It's a national poll coming out next week, and you can click on pretty much any Twitter thing and go. If you want to dive into the crosstabs, they're all there. That's completely public and out there. And yes, we look at all those things.
Thank you.
And let's
I know you do, but we don't seem to see it.
Before we talk about abortion, let me just ask you, let's do a little polling 101 in about a minute. If in the last election, half the people who voted had college degrees and half didn't, and you did a poll and it got back and it said 75% of people have college degrees, would you just publish the poll or would you figure out how to fix it?
Well, you picked something that's rather tricky. The way that I poll, I try to let my data show me.
Right.
So we poll to the general population, and then we weight it there, and then pull out the likely voters. The problem with education was that they were underrepresented because people were looking at past elections to say what this future election was going to look like. And that's how they happened to miss what was going on with the demographics for Trump. So I have a different method that will reveal to me, hopefully.
So let me ask you this, and again, this may not be answerable, but give it a try.
Yeah.
In 16, the kind of received wisdom was that the people who didn't show up in the polls were more likely to be more likely to be Trump voters, that they weren't answering or weren't being found in the data. That's the conventional wisdom. If the polls, I know, I agree with you, but I'm just saying what people think. If the polls are wrong, and as you know, Ann, people across the board like to just say the polls are all wrong, the polls are all fake, whatever. If the polls are wrong now, is that advantaging? Is it under estimating Trump support, Biden support? Impossible to say.
It depends on the poll, so it's hard to give a blanket statement there, Mark. If they are, and if you can get to their methodology statements, there's some that are just kind of crazy, that they're weighting their data to look like they're taking into account whether you voted in 2020, which was a very high turnout. And so how is that going to show up in terms of what your overall numbers look like? To me, I think that could advantage Biden in the polls.
Right.
And if you're looking at all these polls and saying that Trump is leading, I'm always kind of keeping that skeptical eye open.
Yep. Okay, Noah, why don't you tackle abortion? What's wrong with the premise, or do you agree with it, that maybe the big victory for Democrats, as it was in those special elections in Kansas, but clearly played a big role in the midterms? Is it possible that abortion rights and Taylor Swift will drive female votes so high and pro-choice votes so high that Biden and other Democrats will defy expectations?
Well, look, it's possible Democrats are going to lean into that message, and I think they've convinced themselves partly that the 2022 efforts to stave off the red wave in 2022 were partly attributable to that. The data is a little conflicting insofar as there were plenty of Republican elected officials who won re-election in Ohio, for example, Georgia, elsewhere, who had 6-week spans under their belt, and that was not an impediment. In fact, the quality that correlates to a Republican losing an open seat in that cycle really is election denial. And I think that's frankly the one that really unites all the candidates who are unfavorable to the electorate. If you look at, for example, the latest New York Times Siena polls, good poll, among registered voters, there's no gender gap. 46-46 Trump, Biden. Democrats are going to have to do their best to exacerbate tensions, gender-related tensions. That's one way to do it. Abortion is one way to do it. But Donald Trump is not a perfect avatar for a pro-life Republican who will turn off those type of voters. So it is a complicated picture.
Right. All right. Noah, thank you. Ann, thank you. Tim, then Weber, before all of you ask questions, thank you. As I said, I sent you the link previously to the whole focus group. I recommend it to you. Get on the elliptical trainer, spend an hour watching or 45 minutes watching, and lose 500 calories, depending on how fast you go. And I will send around a link to this conversation. I learned a lot, so I'm grateful to those who shared. And you can share that link as well when you get it, or rewatch it if you find this to be a winning episode. Really appreciate you spending an hour with us, and we'll be seeing you again soon on another episode of Two Way. Thank you. Have a great evening.